I'm 24 years old. And 6 months ago, I stood in a hospital hallway staring at a girl I'd never met, a girl who had my father's eyes, my father's jawline, and a medical bracelet on her wrist that said her blood type was the same as mine. She looked up at me from her bed. Thin. Pale. Exhausted. And she said, "You must be his other daughter." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. Because 48 hours earlier, I had stood in front of my entire family at my own engagement party and watched my uncle call my father a cheater, a liar, and a fraud, while my mother sobbed into her hands and my dad just stood there, saying nothing. Taking it. And I let it happen. I'm the one who gave my uncle the photos. What I didn't know yet was that every single thing I believed about my father was wrong. And by the time I understood the truth, I had almost destroyed the only man who had never, not once in 24 years, stopped protecting me. Before I tell you what happened next, and believe me, what happened at that engagement party is something I will never forget, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? And if you saw your parents sneaking out of the house at 11 p.m., taking secret calls, and withdrawing cash every week, what would you think? Because I thought the worst. And I was dead wrong. Let me take you back. Not too far. Just enough so you understand the kind of man my father is. My dad, Thomas, is 51 years old. He's worked at the same manufacturing plant since he was 23. He's never missed a day of work in my entire life. Not when he had the flu. Not when he threw out his back so badly he could barely stand. Not when my mom had surgery and he stayed up all night at the hospital then drove straight to his shift at 6 a.m. He's a quiet man. The kind of man who says more with a look than most people say in an hour. He doesn't complain. He doesn't boast. He wears the same 3 pairs of boots until the soles are worn through, and he still opens the car door for my mom every single time. My mom, Sandra, is the opposite. She's warm, social, loud in the best way. She's the heart of every room she walks into. She and my dad have been married for 27 years. And honestly, for most of my life, I thought they had the kind of marriage other people wished they had. But there was always one thing that made my dad's life harder than it needed to be. My uncle Richard. Richard is my mom's older brother. He's successful, owns 2 car dealerships, lives in a big house on the hill, drives a new Mercedes every year. And he has never, not for one single day, let my father forget that he married up. I didn't realize how much damage that was doing. Not yet. The comments were always subtle. That's the thing about people like my uncle. They don't insult you with a fist. They do it with a smile. At Thanksgiving, "Tom, you're still at the plant? Man, I keep thinking one of these years you'll finally make a move." At Christmas, "Hey, Sandra, you ever think about what life would have been like if you'd married someone with a little more ambition?" He'd laugh after. Like it was a joke. And everyone would chuckle nervously. And my dad would just keep eating. Keep quiet. Keep letting it slide. My mom would sometimes say, "Richard, stop," but she'd say it softly. Like she didn't want to make a scene. Like keeping the peace was more important than defending her husband. I hate admitting this, but for a long time, I didn't fully see it either. I loved my dad. I did. But there was a small part of me, a part I'm deeply ashamed of now, that sometimes wondered why he never pushed back. Why he never fought for more. Why he just took it. I didn't understand yet what strength actually looks like. I was about to learn. It started 7 months ago. March. I was living at home temporarily because my apartment lease had ended and I was between places. My fiancé, Derek, and I were planning our engagement party for May. Life was good. Normal. Until it wasn't. The first thing I noticed was the phone. My dad has never been a phone person. He barely texts. He still calls the TV remote the clicker. But suddenly, his phone was always on him. In his pocket. Face down on the table. And one night, I walked into the kitchen and he was standing by the back door, whispering into it. When he saw me, he hung up immediately. "Who was that?" I asked. "Nobody," he said. "Work stuff." At 11 p.m. I didn't think much of it. Not then. But that was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the signs piled up. And each one hit a little harder than the last. He started leaving the house after dinner. Going for a drive, he'd say. He'd be gone for 2, sometimes 3 hours. When he came back, he looked tired. Not tired like sleepy. Tired like something was pulling him apart from the inside. I noticed he was withdrawing cash. I only knew because I accidentally saw his bank statement on the counter one morning. $400. Then $600. Then another $300. All cash. All in the span of 3 weeks. My mom didn't seem to know. And then came the thing that broke me. I was borrowing his truck one Saturday to pick up some things for the engagement party. I opened the center console looking for a phone charger. And I found a receipt. From a flower shop. A dozen roses. Delivered to an address I didn't recognize. I sat in that truck for 10 minutes, staring at that receipt. My hands were shaking. Because my mother's birthday wasn't for another 4 months. Their anniversary had already passed. And I knew those flowers weren't for her. That's when I started to follow him. I need you to understand, I didn't want to believe it. I would have given anything to be wrong. My dad was my hero. Quietly, stubbornly, without ever asking for recognition, he was the man who held our family together. The idea that he could do this to my mom made me physically sick. But the evidence kept building. The following Tuesday night, he said he was going to help a buddy with his truck. I waited 15 minutes, then I got in my car and followed him. He didn't go to a buddy's house. He drove across town. To an apartment complex I'd never seen before. A mid-rise building near the hospital. He parked, got out, and walked inside like he'd done it 100 times. I sat in my car in the parking lot. My chest was so tight I thought I was having a panic attack. He was in there for over 2 hours. When he came out, he stopped at the entrance. He rubbed his eyes. And even from across the parking lot, I could tell, he was crying. I didn't know what to do with that. But what I did next is the decision I regret most in my entire life. I called my Aunt Karen, Uncle Richard's wife. I don't even know why I called her instead of talking to my mom directly. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I wanted someone else to tell me I was overreacting. Maybe I wanted someone to help me figure it out before I blew up my family. Karen listened. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Oh honey. I'm so sorry. But you need to get proof. Real proof. Before you tell your mother." She sounded caring. She sounded concerned. What I didn't realize was that within an hour of hanging up, she had told Richard everything. And Richard, my uncle, who had spent 27 years making my dad feel small, finally had exactly what he'd always wanted. Ammunition. I went back to that apartment complex 2 more times. The second time, I brought my phone. I sat in the car and waited. My dad walked out of the building at 9:47 p.m. And right behind him, holding the door, was a woman. She was younger than him. Maybe late 40s. She touched his arm briefly, and he nodded at her, and then he walked to his truck. I took 3 photos. When I got home, I sat on my bed and cried for an hour. Then I did the thing that haunts me. I sent the photos to Aunt Karen. "I don't know what to do," I wrote. She replied immediately. "Don't worry. Richard and I will handle this with care. Your mom deserves to know, but we'll do it gently." Gently. That word means nothing to people like Richard. My engagement party was 3 weeks later. May 14th. A Saturday. My mom had spent weeks planning it. She rented out the back room of a nice restaurant. 70 people. Family, friends, coworkers. My dad paid for half of it. I later found out he picked up extra shifts to cover his share. Everything was beautiful. White tablecloths. Flowers. A slideshow of me and Derek that my mom had put together. My dad wore a new shirt, the first new shirt I'd seen him buy in years. He looked proud. That's the part that kills me now. He looked so proud. Dinner was served. Toasts began. My mom gave a tearful, beautiful speech about love and family. Derek's parents said kind words. My best friend made everyone laugh. Then Richard stood up. And the room shifted. I felt it before he even opened his mouth. Something cold settled over the table. Aunt Karen was looking down at her plate. My mom was smiling, expecting another toast. Richard held up his glass. I want to talk about family, he said. About honesty. About what it means to really be there for the people you love. My dad looked up at him. And I saw something flash across his face. Something I'd never seen before. Fear. Because, Richard continued, I've always believed that a man's character is defined by what he does when no one's watching. He paused. He looked directly at my father. Isn't that right, Tom? The room was dead silent. My mother's smile faded. Richard, my dad said quietly. Don't. That one word, don't, should have stopped everything. The way he said it. The way his voice cracked, just barely. It should have made Richard sit down. But Richard had been waiting for this moment for 27 years. I think Sandra deserves to know, Richard said, what her husband's been doing every Tuesday and Thursday night. Where the money's been going. Who he's been visiting in that apartment across town. My mom turned to my dad. Tom? What is he talking about? My dad closed his eyes. Richard pulled out his phone. He turned it around so the people nearest to him could see the screen. The photos. My photos. My father walking out of that building. The woman behind him. Her hand on his arm. Your husband, Richard said, his voice rising now, confident, righteous, has been lying to you. To all of us. 4 months. My mother's hand went to her mouth. The room erupted. Whispers. Gasps. My grandmother, my mom's mother, stood up from her chair and said, I always knew. I always knew he wasn't good enough. And my dad, my quiet, steady, unbreakable dad, sat there. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He looked at my mother, and he said, Sandra. It's not what you think. But I can't explain right now. Please. Trust me. Richard laughed. Actually laughed. Trust you? Tom, we have photos. Your own daughter took them. My mother turned to me. That look. I will carry that look on her face for the rest of my life. Betrayal. Not just from my dad. From me. Because I hadn't come to her. I had gone behind her back and handed the grenade to the one person in our family who would pull the pin at the worst possible moment. My dad stood up. He set his napkin on the table, carefully, the way he always did. He looked at me. And he didn't look angry. He looked heartbroken. I would never hurt your mother, he said to me. Just to me. Quiet enough that only the people near us could hear. I need you to know that. Then he walked out. My engagement party, the night that was supposed to be one of the happiest of my life, ended with my mother crying in the bathroom, my uncle sitting back down with a look of satisfaction he barely tried to hide, and my father driving away alone. And I just sat there. Because I had done this. The next week was the worst of my life. My mom told my dad to stay somewhere else. He went to a motel near the plant. He didn't fight it. He just packed a bag and left. He called my mom every day. She didn't answer. He texted me once, "I love you. I'm sorry you're hurting." That's it. That's all he said. No defense. No explanation. No anger. And something about that, something about the way he was handling it, started to eat at me. Because guilty people explain. Guilty people get defensive. Guilty people make excuses. My dad did none of that. He just waited. I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment he walked out of that apartment building. The woman touching his arm. His face when he left. He had been crying. Not the face of a man leaving an affair. The face of a man carrying something unbearable. And there was something else. Something I'd pushed aside because it didn't fit the story I'd already decided was true. The flowers. The dozen roses. The receipt said they were delivered to a room number. Not an apartment number. A room number. Like a hospital room. I went back and looked at it again. I'd taken a picture of it on my phone weeks ago. Room 4112. University Medical Center. I felt something cold run through me. That wasn't an apartment. It was a hospital. The next morning, I drove to University Medical Center. I walked up to the information desk. I didn't have a name. I didn't have anything except a room number and a feeling in my gut that I had made a terrible mistake. "Can you tell me who's in room 4112? I asked. The woman behind the desk looked at me. "Are you family?" "I think I might be," I said. She hesitated. Then she said, "The patient's name is Lily Reeves. She's in the oncology ward." Oncology. Cancer. My legs went weak. I walked through those hallways like I was moving through water. Everything was slow. My heartbeat was so loud I could hear it in my ears. I found the room. The door was slightly open. And inside, sitting in a chair next to the bed, reading aloud from a paperback book, was the woman from the photos. The woman I had assumed was my father's affair. She was reading to a girl. The girl was young. Early 20s. She had no hair. She was thin, painfully thin, with tubes in her arm and a monitor beeping softly beside her. But her face. She looked like my dad. The same wide-set eyes. The same strong jawline. The same way her mouth curved slightly to the left when she noticed me standing in the doorway. "Can I help you?" the older woman asked, standing up. I couldn't speak. The girl in the bed looked at me. Studied me. And then, slowly, she smiled. "You must be his other daughter," she said. The room tilted. "I'm Lily," she said. "I think your dad is my dad too. Here's what I learned. And I need you to hear every word of this because it changes everything. When my father was 19 years old, before he met my mother, before he married into her family, before Richard ever had a chance to look down on him, he was with a girl named Corinne. They were young. They were broke. And Corinne got pregnant. Her parents were strict. Religious. Furious. They pulled Corinne out of town before my dad even knew what was happening. They moved 3 states away. Corinne had the baby, a girl. Lily. My dad tried to find them. He wrote letters that were returned unopened. He called numbers that were disconnected. Eventually, Corinne's family told him through a lawyer that if he tried to contact them again, they would file a restraining order. He was 19. He had no money. No resources. No power. So he lost his daughter. He never told my mother. Not because he was ashamed, but because by the time he met my mom, the wound was so deep he had buried it just to survive. And then the years passed. And the secret got heavier. And telling the truth got harder. Until 7 months ago. When a 22-year-old girl named Lily Reeves, who had been diagnosed with leukemia 8 months prior, decided she needed to find her biological father before it was too late. She found him through a DNA registry. She sent him a letter. And my father, the man everyone called quiet, passive, unambitious, drove across town, walked into that hospital, and met the daughter he had lost 22 years ago. He never missed a visit after that. The woman in the photos, the woman I had photographed and sent to my aunt, the woman whose image was displayed at my engagement party as proof of betrayal, was Corinne. Lily's mother. She wasn't my father's affair. She was the mother of his firstborn child. She had come back into his life for one reason and one reason only, because their daughter was dying and she couldn't do it alone. The cash withdrawals? My dad was paying for Lily's treatment. What insurance didn't cover? What Corinne couldn't afford? He was emptying his savings, the money he'd spent 30 years building, to keep his daughter alive. The late-night phone calls? Doctors. Nurses. Updates on blood work, on chemo schedules, on whether or not Lily was strong enough for the next round. The flowers? He brought them to her hospital room every 2 weeks. Because Lily told him once that roses were her favorite, and my father is the kind of man who remembers that. He wasn't cheating on my mother. He was trying to save his daughter's life. And he kept it a secret because he was terrified that if the truth came out, he would lose everything. That my mother would feel betrayed not by an affair, but by a lie of omission that had lasted almost 3 decades. That Richard would twist it into something ugly. That I would look at him differently. He absorbed every accusation. Took every punch. Let himself be humiliated in front of 70 people at his own daughter's engagement party. Because he thought suffering in silence would protect us. That's who my father is. I sat in that hospital room for 3 hours. Lily told me everything. How she'd been scared to reach out. How my dad had cried the first time he saw her, full, body-shaking sobs from a man who never cried. How he came every Tuesday and Thursday without fail. How he brought her books and flowers and sat with her through the worst chemo sessions, holding her hand, telling her stories about his life. He talks about you all the time, she said. He's so proud of you. He didn't want this to hurt you. I wanted to break apart. I wanted to scream at myself. Instead, I just held her hand. My sister's hand. And I said, I'm going to fix this. I didn't call my mom first. I didn't call Aunt Karen. I called my Uncle Richard. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, sweetheart, he said, casual as anything. How are you holding up? I know the truth, I said. About Dad. About Lily. About what he was actually doing. Silence. A long silence. Richard, I said. Did you know? More silence. Did Aunt Karen tell you what she found out when she looked into it? Before the party? Because here's the part that made my blood go cold. After I sent Karen those photos, she didn't just sit on them. She told me later, tearfully, guiltily, that Richard had hired someone to look into it. A private investigator. Within a week, they had Lily's name. They had the hospital. They had the connection. Richard knew. He knew before the engagement party that my father wasn't having an affair. He knew my dad had a sick daughter. He knew the cash was going to medical bills. And he stood up at that party anyway. He took the photos, the ones that only told half the story, and he used them. Because the truth didn't serve him. The truth would have made my father look like a hero. And Richard couldn't have that. You knew, I said into the phone. Richard's voice was measured. Calm. Practiced. I knew he was keeping secrets from your mother. That's all that mattered. He was paying for his dying daughter's cancer treatment. He lied to Sandra for 27 years. And you humiliated him in front of his family because you've spent your entire life trying to make him feel like he's nothing. He didn't answer. I'm telling everyone, I said. Everything. Including what you knew and when you knew it. I hung up before he could respond.